Dan Saunders found an ATM that changed his life forever. He figured out how to endlessly withdraw money that wasn't even his. Within 5 months, he had spent over $1.5 million, and at the same time, he was having daily phone calls with the bank he was robbing behind their back. And the way he got caught created a story that was never heard before.
Lavish dining, private jets, expensive gifts for friends, and it didn't cost him 1 cent.
$1.6 million dollars in the period of 4 months. This is a story you're going to want to listen to.
In 2011, Dan Saunders lived a simple life. He lived in a town called Wangaratta in South Australia. Here he worked as a bartender at a small local bar. However, little did he know that this bar would change his life forever. One night, Dan finished his shift and decided to go drinking with his friends. While they were drinking, it was time to pay up. This time Dan was supposed to pay, but he swiftly realized that he didn't have any cash on him. By this time it was around 1 AM, so he ventured out looking for the nearest ATM to withdraw money from. Just around the corner, he came across an ATM belonging to the National Australia Bank. In this bank, he had 2 accounts and 1 card for each. 1 debit card for his savings accounts, on which he didn't save much, and 1 credit card, which was almost $2,000 in debt. When Dan tried to view the balance on his savings account, an error appeared. According to the ATM, his balance was unavailable. He was a little confused and decided to transfer the $200 from his credit card to his savings account. But the ATM rejected the transaction. Dan didn't give up and tried to withdraw the $200 from his savings account anyway. And all of a sudden, it worked. At first it looked like he had just successfully transferred the $200 and therefore Dan didn't think much of it. He went back to the bar and invited his friends for a couple more drinks. On his way home, he saw the ATM again. He decided to give it another shot. The ATM still didn't show a balance on his savings account, and when he transferred another $200 from his credit card to his savings account, the payment was declined again. He thought to himself, what if he tried withdrawing those $200 from his savings account like he did before? Miraculously, it worked. He tried again. $200, $400, $800, and it all went through. He repeated the process until he had withdrawn a total of $2,000 and headed home. After Dan woke up the next day and saw $2,000 in his wallet, he expected his account to be in even more debt than it already was. He opened online banking, and to his surprise, there was nothing there. No record of withdrawals from the night before, and his account looked like nothing has happened. At the time, Dan saw it as a one-time mistake that would never happen again. So he naively thought he'd return the money to the bank. Why naively? He never returned the money. Dan didn't feel like returning the money right away, so instead he bought a new fridge, invited his friends for a few drinks at the bar, and started sports betting with the rest of the money. If he won, he could return all of that money to the bank and still make a profit. Brilliant plan, except he gambled everything. For the last time, Dan needed to be sure, and he called his bank. But what he found out changed his life forever. The savings account he withdrew money from was now $2,000 in debt. However, the credit card he was transferring money from had no record of the transfers. At this moment, it started to sink in, and Dan couldn't stop thinking about it. One day, shortly after midnight, he went to the same ATM. He inserted his card and noticed a major difference right off the bat. This time the ATM showed him the balance of his savings account, minus $2,000. He transferred $1,000 from his credit card to his savings account, and again, the ATM rejected the transaction. Nonetheless, this time when he checked his savings account balance, it was not in debt for $2,000, but only for $1,000. He tried it again, then transferred another $1,000, and suddenly his savings account was at a zero. Yet the balance on the credit card he was transferring money from hasn't changed. To top it all off, he withdrew $2,000 in cash and headed home. But there's a catch. 2 days later, Dan discovered that his savings account was $4,000 in debt. All transfers and withdrawals were deducted, but again, nothing changed on his credit card. At this point, Dan realized how it all worked and developed a strategy. Between midnight and 3 in the morning, the National Australia Bank's ATMs were in standby mode and had no internet connection. Thanks to this, these ATMs could not check the balance of any accounts and transferred money anyways. The problem is, when the ATM eventually figured out what it had done wrong, it wired the money back. But Dan figured out that this process always happens the day after between 4 and 5 AM. His strategy was brilliant. Every night, he doubled the amount of money he was transferring. On Monday, between midnight and 3 in the morning, Dan transferred $10,000 into his savings account. On Tuesday, during the same morning hour, he transferred $20,000 $20,000 this time. And at 4 a.m., the ATM realized what mistake it made on Monday and deducted $10,000 from Dan's account. But the $20,000 from Tuesday remained untouched until Wednesday morning. Dan got himself into this never-ending spiral of money. He immediately tried to look for ways to create even more money from the money he had created. First, Dan tried to get a small groups of friends together to do sports betting with him. They had a few successes but lost most of their money. This was bad news for the rest of the group, but not for Dan. He knew how to get his money back easily. He went back to the same ATM every night and kept going to work during all of this. But it didn't take long for someone to notice how much money he was spending, because Dan was betting through Tab. The bar where Dan worked had been informed by Tab that one night he and his friends had gambled more money in one night than Tab had made in a month. Dan was fired from his job and his girlfriend broke up with him. She didn't know what he was up to and wanted no part in it. They have been together for 4 years and she never gave him a chance to explain anything. After the breakup, Dan needed a break and made a risky move. He told his friend about the ATM discovery. This was the day that Dan's lifestyle changed very quickly. In just 5 months, he spent over $1.5 million. He gambled more than before, stayed in the most expensive hotels, ate at luxury restaurants, and paid for private jets for himself and his friends. At some point, Dan realized that he will probably go to jail for this, so he decided to stop. I'm just kidding, he started spending even more money than before. He continued going to fancy clubs and often took random people off the street with him. He would invite them for drinks, give them money, or take them to stores like Gucci, Louis Vuitton, and he would buy them whatever they wished for. Dan was literally becoming Robin Hood, or Mr. Beast. He gave the waiters the biggest tips they've ever seen. He even sent his friend to Paris so she could learn French. Dan did anything he could think of. One day, he saw a street performer playing guitar. He bought him new equipment and secretly paid bystanders to listen to this musician. And after a while, an audience the size of a small festival listened to him. The funny thing is, Dan got frequent calls from the bank during all of this. Not because they were suspicious of him, but because they were curious if he was happy with the bank, which of course Dan was. Many times they were worried that someone had stolen Dan's card and was spending a huge amount of money on it. Dan assured them that everything was fine and that he was the one spending the money. The ATMs from which Dan withdrew money were limited to $1,000 for a single card. But that wasn't something Dan couldn't handle. He transferred $100,000 into his account and came to the bank counter, where they happily handed him his money. Dan continued, throwing his own parties and once even threw a party for the staff of the National Australia Bank. Yes, the same bank he was robbing behind their backs. He also gave a toast at this party. He thanked everyone for doing their jobs well and assured them that business was thriving more than it had ever before. Sadly at the time, Dan had no idea that his lifestyle was coming to an end. Ironically, the one who caught Dan was not the National Australia Bank, but Dan himself. His conscience was bothering him more and more every day. Every day could be his last. He thought that one day, when he forgot the whole thing himself, the police would arrest him in front of his own family. Dan became paranoid and confessed to everything. The bank told him that they had turned the situation over to the police. His account was $1.6 million in debt and he was down to his last $80,000 in cash. Days, weeks, and months have passed. Dan still hasn't heard from anyone. 3 years passed and nothing had changed. Dan couldn't take it anymore. He couldn't take it as closed without an official statement, and so he did something no one expected. He reached out to one of the biggest media outlets in Australia and told everyone about his story. Dozens of articles came out and he appeared on TV. He finally got what he wanted and the police started looking for him. The irony was that until Dan went on TV, the bank never spoke to the police. The whole thing was a lie, and for a simple reason. If the bank had gone after Dan from the start, they would have been risking a lot. Dan's story would have gotten out fast and all their clients would have known about it. First of all, they would know about the mistake itself, which could have been exploited by literally anyone. But most importantly, they would realize that they put their money in a bank that was not well secured. For that reason, the bank didn't want to address the situation until Dan forced them to. Based on Dan's testimony, even the judge himself didn't know what was going on. The bank only provided the police with a few statements and there wasn't much evidence against him. He was sentenced to 1 year in jail, 18 months of community service, and was ordered to repay the bank $250,000. Today, Dan lives a quiet life. He works as a caregiver during the day and in a restaurant at night. In between, he's working on a book and a Hollywood movie about his story. This video was heavily inspired by Josephie, Half as Interesting, and the podcast with Dan himself. Please check out those videos as well because there's a lot of other information I didn't get a chance to share in this video. Consider subscribing to this channel and I'll see you next time.